except for discrimination. There is neither Samskrita, or things made, nor Asamskrita, or things not made. The ignorant hold on to them as a barren woman does to the child of her dream. What fools they are. So, Professor Suzuki has kindly given us the two terms, Samskrita and its opposite, Asamskrita. He actually explains these two terms in a note from his book, A Manual of Zen Buddhism. I'll just read out what it says, and I'll put the quote in the notes below the video. According to Buddhist philosophy, existence is divided into two groups, Samskrita and Asamskrita. The Samskrita applies to anything that does any kind of work in any possible manner, while the Asamskrita accomplishes nothing. Of this class are space regarded as a mode of reality, Nirvana, and non-existence owing to lack of necessary conditions. So that's according to Buddhist philosophy. And there's probably a lot that could be philosophized here, which I'm sure many Buddhists were guilty of, and possibly still are. We don't want to be getting into philosophy. What we want to do is to see how this understanding can help direct us back to realization. As enlightenment practitioners, we're concerned with our relationship with the world. And although we might be engaging on a very active level with it, it's our essential understanding, our essential tone towards it, which is important. Our essential tone, our essential understanding is that we want nothing to do with it. It isn't that we're rejecting it, as I've said before, and throwing up our arms in horror at it. No, we're just sloughing it off. It's part of a natural process of maturation. We are realizing that the reality that we normally subscribe to, which we could call the common reality or the conventional reality or the consensus reality, it's usually one of the culture that we most identify with, is not reality at all. So basically we're encouraging that realization, and in that realization reinforcing our own identification with the awareness which underpins everything. Another way of translating these two terms is the conditioned and the unconditioned. Basically the world is made up of certain conditions, of a variety of conditions, an infinite variety perhaps. And as enlightenment practitioners, we're moving from the conditioned to the unconditioned, from samsara to nirvana. The thing is, there's no route, there is no path to follow from samsara, the world of the conditioned, to nirvana, the world of the unconditioned. It isn't a question of refining your mind to the point whereby it's receptive to the unconditioned. Not at all. It's something you awaken to. It's a quantum leap. It's like the path to waking up in the morning. At some point you simply wake up. There isn't a point where you're less asleep and then less asleep and then less asleep and gradually so on until you're finally awake. There might be intermediate states, but you can wake up just like that. You don't have to go through these intermediate states. And once you have woken up, it can take some people quite a long time to come to. This is analogous with our enlightenment practice. So really what we have to do is realize that the world is not how we believe it to be. And one of the ways we believe it to be is that it's made up of things. This is the premise of science, that everything is made up of something else, right down to the atomic level. There seems to be an assumption that there's some fundamental objective reality on which everything else is constructed. That's what the word atomic meant originally, the fundamental building block. But then of course they found out that atoms could be broken up and so on, and this dance of subatomic particles seems to continue. Now the Yoga Vasishtha, which I covered in a previous series of videos, often described consciousness as atomic in nature. Consciousness is the fundamental particle, because consciousness cannot be divided up. It can be apparently divided up, but it isn't divisible because it's fundamental. This is the nature of true atomicism. So in order to move from the conditioned to the unconditioned, we have to realize that the conditioned is actually underpinned by consciousness. Now, Professor Suzuki's note describes space as something which is unconditioned. Space in physical terms is very much like consciousness. Physically, space is what allows all matter to be. You couldn't have matter without space. Spiritually, consciousness is what allows everything to be. If there was no awareness, there wouldn't be anything. You can hypothesize that there would be something without consciousness, but that's just a hypothesis, which again is a function of consciousness. It's got no substance to it. The hypothesis has no substance. And according to modern understanding of physics, space isn't this absolute unchanging thing. Space is actually intimately related to the matter that it contains. I don't know if science actually says that space is actually the same as matter. I don't know if anybody has come up with that theory, but it makes a lot of sense, especially since science believes now that empty space is actually full of things, full of energy, and in fact the universe could have come out of empty space. Anyway, these are interesting conjectures, but what I'm trying to do is get this parallel here between consciousness and space. They're both seen as passive, as nothing. Consciousness is often described as emptiness. And in the same way that perhaps space and matter are non-different, consciousness is non-different from everything that it's conscious of. So what this verse is saying is give up on this distinction between the conditioned and the unconditioned. We have to realize that everything is of the nature of consciousness, of awareness. Otherwise, we're like the barren woman's son, the barren woman's child. This is another metaphor which is used frequently in the Yoga Vasishtha, that those of us that adhere to conventional reality and believe that to be true are like the barren woman's son. And it's not just the barren woman that's suffering from this delusion, because we can talk about the barren woman's son. It's a complete contradiction. We could give him a name. We could talk about how he grew up, and maybe he's got some afflictions or whatever. But we're talking about something which has no existence. Or if we want to say it's got an existence, it's got the same existence as a dream or a mirage. So there's only this discrimination going on, the discriminating mind constructing our conventional reality, which we imbue with a sense of reality.